The moment the screen goes dark, there is a split second of absolute quiet. It is a heavy physical sensation, a sudden vacuum in the air around you, in that brief window before the mind can scramble for its next distraction. A profound discomfort sets in. We do not know what to do with the quiet. We have forgotten how to exist within it. The immediate reflex, honed by years of conditioning, is to reach out and fill the space. We swipe, we tap, we turn up the volume, doing anything to build a wall of sound between ourselves and the silence. This is not just a modern habit. It is a symptom of a deep existential panic. We live in an era saturated with digital noise, a relentless downpour of voices, opinions, and fragmented data. We use this noise as a barricade against our own internal landscape. We are terrified of the void. We fear that if we strip away the constant stimulation, we will be left face to face with an emptiness we cannot explain and cannot control. So, we hoard information. We hoard distraction. It is a quiet, collective franticness. Watch a crowd waiting for a train, or people standing in line for coffee. Every spare second is packed with someone else's thoughts, someone else's drama, someone else's carefully curated life. We have convinced ourselves that an empty moment is a wasted moment. We treat time as a container that must be stuffed to the brim, terrified that any lingering gap might expose the fragile architecture of our daily routines. Then the battery dies. The network fails. The room falls quiet. You are left entirely alone with yourself, and the silence is deafening. In that sudden, uninvited stillness, the carefully constructed walls begin to crack. The absence of input feels like a physical pressure, a weight pressing against your chest. It is in this exact moment of friction that the ancient world offers a mirror to our modern madness. Thousands of years ago, long before the invention of the algorithm or the endless glowing scroll, the Tao Te Ching documented this human friction. It observed our obsession with the tangible, the solid, the things we can hold, measure, and accumulate. The text did not view this as a flaw to be punished, but as a fundamental misunderstanding of how reality actually functions. It looked at humanity's endless grasping and recognized a profound tragedy in our refusal to simply let things be. The ancient wisdom offers a lens that feels almost entirely alien to our current reality. It suggests that our relentless pursuit of fullness is exactly what leaves us feeling so incredibly hollow. The Taoist philosophy points to a completely inverted way of moving through the world. It asks us to look away from the material we are desperately trying to gather and to focus instead on the spaces we are so desperately trying to avoid. Consider the concept of the empty vessel. You take wet clay from the earth and mold it into the shape of a cup. You fire it in a kiln, you glaze it, you admire its form and its texture, but it is not the clay that makes the cup useful. The utility of the vessel relies entirely on the empty space inside it. The void is where the water goes. Without the emptiness, the cup is just a solid block of dirt. We spend our entire lives obsessing over the clay. We build the thick, heavy walls of our identity, our careers, our intellect, constantly adding material to prove that we are substantial. We accumulate opinions, facts, and endless streams of data, operating under the delusion that density equals value. We want to be full, believing that a full life is a meaningful life. But in our rush to fill the vessel, we destroy its capacity to hold anything of true substance. Look closely at the modern mind. It is a crowded, claustrophobic room, packed floor to ceiling with the debris of 1,000 daily inputs. We treat our consciousness like a landfill for digital noise, terrified that if we stop consuming, we might cease to exist. Every corner of our attention is rented out to advertisers, influencers, and the artificial urgency of the news cycle. There is no room left to breathe, let alone to think. A cup that is already full cannot receive anything new. It can only spill over, creating a mess of everything it touches. The water runs down the sides, pooling on the table, wasted and useless. This is the exact state of our exhausted, overstimulated nervous systems. We are overflowing, yet we remain entirely unquenched. This is the core of the teaching regarding the void. The Tao Te Ching reminds us that the usefulness of a room comes from its empty space, not from the walls and doors that define it. The turning of a heavy wooden wheel depends entirely on the empty hub at its center, the negative space where the spokes converge. The structure is necessary, but the emptiness is what allows for movement, for life, for utility. We have entirely lost this understanding of structural emptiness. We look at an empty calendar and see a failure of ambition, a sign that we are falling behind. We look at an empty hour on a Sunday afternoon and see a problem to be solved, a gap to be aggressively plugged with content or productivity. We have pathologized the very space that makes human growth possible. Why do we run so desperately from the quiet? Because silence forces us to confront the unaddressed, overgrown parts of our internal landscape. Without the hum of a podcast, the rhythm of background music, or the glow of a screen, the suppressed anxieties begin to stir. The quiet griefs, the lingering doubts, and the uncomfortable truths we have buried under a mountain of daily tasks slowly rise to the surface of our awareness. We use noise as a powerful, socially acceptable anesthetic. We drug ourselves with fullness to avoid the deep discomfort of our own company. It is much easier to listen to a stranger talk about their life on a screen than it is to sit in a silent room and listen to the quiet, terrifying voice of our own conscience. Reclaiming silence requires a radical, almost violent shift in perception. It means recognizing that silence is not an absence of sound, but rather a profound, heavy presence. It is the underlying canvas upon which all sound, all thought, and all action is painted. Without the silence, the music has no rhythm. Without the empty space between the notes, the melody collapses into a chaotic wall of noise. The silence is not a lack of something, it is the foundation of everything. When you finally stop trying to fill the void stops being a threat. It transforms from a terrifying, bottomless abyss into a space of pure potential. It becomes the breathing room your mind has been starving for. You begin to realize that the emptiness you were running from was never your enemy. It was the only place where you could actually rest. Step out into the center of a crowded city. Watch the people walking down the concrete sidewalks, their eyes locked on glowing rectangles, white wires dangling from their ears. physical world, but they are psychologically absent. They are entirely consumed by the artificial fullness they carry in their pockets, entirely disconnected from the raw, immediate reality of the wind, the sky, and the ground beneath their feet. This constant, unrelenting consumption creates a state of chronic inner turbulence. Our minds are like muddy water, violently stirred up by an endless barrage of notifications, social obligations, and manufactured outrage. We feel the confusion and the lack of clarity, and our instinct is to fix it. We try to calm the turbulent water by stirring it faster, by frantically seeking out the next piece of information that will finally make us feel complete and settled. But you cannot force muddy water to clear by stirring it. You cannot wrestle your mind into a state of peace by feeding it more data. You can only leave it alone. You must step back and let the silt settle on its own, completely unbothered by your need to control the outcome. The ancient texts teach that stillness is the ultimate master of motion. By stepping back, by allowing the emptiness to simply be empty, clarity naturally and inevitably arises. When you stop agitating the mind, the heavy particles of anxiety, regret, and endless rumination slowly drift to the bottom. The water becomes transparent, not because you forced it to be clean, but because you finally gave it the space to settle. This is the hidden, terrifying power of emptiness. It is not a passive surrender, and it is certainly not a nihilistic giving up on the world. It is an active, fiercely courageous choice to hold space in a society that demands constant output and relentless consumption. It takes profound, almost rebellious strength to sit in a quiet room and do absolutely nothing. We must begin to view our internal emptiness not as a deficit that needs to be cured, but as a sanctuary that needs to be protected. When you strip away the digital noise, the expectations of others, and the relentless need to prove your own existence through production, what remains is the raw, unvarnished truth of who you are. This empty space is where true intuition lives, waiting patiently for you to quiet down enough to hear it. Imagine walking through the world with this kind of internal architecture, a life where you are not constantly reacting to the frantic stimulus of your environment, a life where you possess the internal volume, the deep, empty capacity to absorb the shocks of reality without shattering into 1,000 pieces. That kind of resilience cannot be bought, and it cannot be downloaded. It is forged only in the quiet spaces, in the deliberate daily embrace of the void. The next time the noise fades and the screen goes dark, do not immediately reach for a distraction. Let the heavy silence wash over you. Let the emptiness hold you, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. The vessel is already built. It is already perfect. You only need to let it be empty.